I'm joined in studio by Dr. Tshepiso Scott, who is Managing Director at Tshepiso Scott Law Firm. Thank you so much for coming through once again and having this conversation with me. So it's the buzzword, right?
Yes.
Delinquent director. It doesn't really roll off my tongue at the very least.
Yes.
But what is it? What does it mean for a person to be declared a delinquent director?
Okay, so for a person to be declared a delinquent director, it basically speaks to the fact that they have grossly abused their position as a director. So this can occur in a number of situations, for instance, misrepresenting financial statements in order to have certain things passed through that shouldn't be passed through, for instance, or having access to information and using that information to benefit yourself or to benefit someone other than the company or a subsidiary of the company, or otherwise causing harm to the company, either intentionally or through gross negligence. So those are the instances in which a person can be declared a delinquent director broadly. But there are actually two prongs to this. So there's that category of instances where you can be declared a delinquent director, but there are also instances where you're actually ineligible to be a director or disqualified from being a director at the get-go. And if you consent to being a director, regardless of the fact that you're disqualified or ineligible because, for instance, you were under probation or you didn't have capacity or you were guilty of an offense, whatever the instance may be, then also you may be declared as a delinquent director.
And how long do these declarations last? I mean, this is a process from the Companies Act, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah. So the declaration for delinquency, if it flows from the instances that I mentioned first, the willful misconduct and using information to benefit yourself that you shouldn't, etc., that one lasts for a period of 7 years. And it can be conditional. We can speak about setting it aside as the conversation proceeds. It isn't as permanent as the other one. So if you become declared as a delinquent director because of the fact that you were actually ineligible or disqualified to be a director from the get-go, then that is actually it's permanent, and you can't ever practice as a director anywhere in South Africa. Yeah.
But what are the implications, Dr. Scott? I mean, if I'm someone who believes that, you know, I'm untouchable,
yes,
why should I care that I've been declared a delinquent director?
Okay. So firstly, being declared as a delinquent director has a very real financial impact on people's pockets. There are a lot of people who actually are almost career directors. So they make most of their income from sitting on boards of directors. And once you've been declared as a delinquent, that means you can't sit as a director on any of those boards anymore, meaning that financially you'll definitely feel the pinch. But in addition to that, once you're declared delinquent, you actually become disqualified from sitting as a director. And Section 69 of the Companies Act actually broadens the definition of a director, not only to refer to someone who actually sits on a board of directors, but to refer to a prescribed officer as well. So that would be a senior manager in a company, for instance. So you're then not able to hold any positions of senior management in companies. You're also then not able to hold any position as a committee member for any of the board committees in any company. So it is quite far-reaching in terms of how it can actually impede on your career.
And does it provide for a path for damages, a damages claim against a director, you know, who's been designated a delinquent director for their conduct? Can other stakeholders in the company bring forward claims against that person?
So your delinquency application won't necessarily result in a damages claim flowing, but there are other provisions in the Companies Act that can be used in order for damages to be claimed against you as a director. So for instance, Section 77 of the Companies Act provides for directors to be held liable for any loss or damage that can be incurred for any conduct on their part that is in contravention to the Companies Act. So in those instances, then they can come actually against you as a director and claim for that loss or damage. There's also a Section 218 remedy for civil actions that can be taken against you if you're a director for any harm that is caused to any person. So it's much more far-reaching. Any harm caused to any person as a result of you contravening the provisions of the Companies Act. So there are other mechanisms in the Companies Act that are available for an actual damages claim where they want to actually retrieve any monetary loss that they have incurred as a result of a director.
So how developed is the case law around this issue? Are we at a point where we now understand what the contours are of this particular provision because of practice in the courts?
Definitely. So there have been a number of cases that have been put forward with delinquent directors. And they have already been all the way to the Supreme Court of Appeal, for instance. So that just indicates how developed the jurisprudence is around that. There have been instances where people have even tried to challenge the actual provision of delinquency as unconstitutional. So we have jurisprudence on that that supports the reason why we have a delinquency provision in the Companies Act itself. So it is quite developed. We do, if a matter goes to the courts, we are aware of what needs to be looked at in order for a delinquency application to be granted.
So if I'm on the other end and I want to avoid being declared a delinquent director,
yes.
What would I need? What would be the standard? What would I need to do?
So firstly, do things right. So
always important.
Yes. So there is a provision, if you don't know what is right, there's a provision in the Companies Act, Section 76, that provides for the standards of directors' conduct. And that provides for things that everyone should really be aware of if they're in that space. So acting in good faith, observing your fiduciary duties, not disclosing your personal financial interests, not doing anything that would benefit yourself at the expense of the company, etc. So if you comply with that, generally, you won't be held, you won't face a delinquency application. But once you do, once you find yourself in a position where you have been faced with a delinquency application, the Companies Act, if it is not that first, the second prong that I mentioned, the permanent one. If it's not the permanent one and it's a 7-year period one, then after a period of 3 years, you can come to, if you've been declared as a delinquent, you can then come to the court to have that order of delinquency suspended for that period of 3 years. And the court can consider it, and they may impose certain conditions on your suspension. So they may say, for instance, that your declaration is now limited to a specific segment of the industry, or that for the suspension period, you're required to do X, Y, Z. And after that suspension period, 2 years after that, 3 years after the suspension period has happened, within 2 years, you can then apply to actually have it set aside. But the court will only set it aside if it is absolutely comfortable that you'll be able to successfully sit as a director on a board. So you'll be able to actually uphold the duties that are expected of directors sitting on a board.
So I'm just wondering if you are declared a delinquent director, would it affect your ability to start up your own company and get it registered with the CIPC?
Definitely. It will definitely affect your capacity to start up any company in South Africa. There's actually a register that is kept by the CIPC. It actually logs all the people who are, when you become delinquent, you become disqualified from being a director. Yeah. So all people who are disqualified or have been declared ineligible to sit as a director will then sit on that register. So that they can't actually be a director in any company. I'm
out of time and I want to squeeze in a quick one.
Okay.
How important is all of this in the scheme of governance
yes.
in the country?
It's extremely important. The delinquency provision is basically it's an accountability provision. It's there to make sure that directors are upheld to the standards of conduct that they are meant to in terms of the Companies Act, but also in terms of the General King Code of corporate governance. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Tshepiso Scott, thank you so much. I'm terribly sorry. I'm completely out of time. She is managing director at Tshepiso Scott Law Firm, and we've been talking about that.